This episode is brought to you by Sterling Soap Company. Fellas, you've heard the phrase, look good, feel good, right? But why not add smell good to that too? That's where Sterling Soap Company comes in. First, Sterling Soap is 100% natural and has a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne. Second, there's a scent just for you. How about burgundy? Yeah, it's more than a color. The Sterling Soap folks blend natural essential oils with hints of mahogany, golden amber, and sandalwood. Or how about D503, an intensely masculine scent inspired by Legend by Mont Blanc. And third, you will feel good about the price. For just a little more than you'd pay at the grocery store, Sterling Soap will leave you feeling clean, refreshed, and ready for whatever's next. Give Sterling Soap a try today. Visit sterlingsoap.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
This is a special Historically Speaking Sports Bulletin. This is Dana Augusta reporting. So, the 2025 Final Four is here, and the teams that survived the gauntlet to get to San Antonio is an interesting mix that features a blue blood, Duke, a pair of traditional SEC powers, Florida and Auburn, and a program that has been over the last 60 years one of the winningest programs in all of college basketball that has never won a title, which is the University of Houston. Now, all four of these teams are hungry for a championship. A couple of them looking to add a trophy to its already impressive collection, while the other two are looking for their very first one. And all four will converge onto San Antonio, Texas. This is the fifth time that the Final Four will be held in the Alamo City and the Alamo Dome. The first time was in 1998 when Kentucky won its second national championship in a space of 3 years when the Wildcats defeated the Rick Majerus coached Utah Utes. Later in 2004, the UConn Huskies, led by Emeka Okafor, defeated Georgia Tech, and who could forget in 2008 when Kansas defeated Memphis and Derrick Rose in overtime and a remarkable last-second three-pointer at the end of regulation by Mario Chalmers. The most recent time the Alamo Dome was the site of the Final Four was in 2018, when Villanova claimed its second title in the school history, beating Michigan. Now, in 2025, headlining the Final Four is the Duke Blue Devils, coached by former player John Shire, who has been more than a capable replacement of Coach Mike Krzyzewski. Now, the Blue Devils was the top seed in the East region this year and has reached the Final Four, this time without Coach K. This is the first time that has happened since 1978. That year, Duke, coached by Bill Foster, lost in the championship game in St. Louis to Jack Givens and the University of Kentucky. Coming to San Antonio, the Blue Devils is a favorite to win its sixth national championship with one of the best pro prospects in this year's college basketball season, Cooper Flagg. Yet, typical of Duke, he is far from being alone. Another player that has been a key contributor to the Blue Devils' run to San Antonio is a junior from Australia named Tyrese Proctor. Now, Duke will enter this Final Four with more appearances than any other team in this year's field. In fact, their 18 Final Fours is more than all of the appearances of the other three teams combined. Duke has 18 appearances in the Final Four, while Houston, Auburn, and Florida has a combined 15 appearances. If victorious, Duke would claim their first national title in 10 years, when Duke defeated Wisconsin 68-63 in Indianapolis. Duke will play the late game this upcoming Saturday night when they take on the Houston Cougars. Houston playing in their seventh Final Four, and of the teams that remain in the tournament, Houston has the shortest history. Their basketball program began in 1945. Actually, the women's program at the University of Houston is older. But in their 80 years of history, there has been a lot of memories, both good and bad. The Cougars' history simply could be summed up in three different eras. The first era was the mid to late 1960s, when led by Coach Guy Lewis, who introduced bringing black college basketball players to the South. A couple of his biggest recruits was Don Chaney, who was starting the NBA in the 70s, and future Hall of Famer Elvin Hayes, whose 38 points against UCLA and Lou Alcindor at the Astrodome in the Game of the Century in January of 1968 ended the Bruins' 47-game winning streak. Yet the 1968 season didn't end the way they hoped, losing to those same UCLA Bruins in the national championship game. The second era of Cougar on-court greatness took place in the early 1980s with the famed Phi Slamma Jamma, the world's first dunking fraternity. Led by Akeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, Benny Anders, and Alvin Franklin, the Cougars would reach the Final Four 3 consecutive years, yet losing in the championship game in 1983 on a buzzer-beating alley-oop by North Carolina State. Jim Valvano still looking for someone to hug. And then again in 1984, losing to Patrick Ewing and Georgetown in Seattle. This is the third great era of Houston Cougar basketball led by Coach Kelvin Sampson, who was named head coach in 2014. In 2021, he led the Cougars back to the Final Four, only to lose in the semifinal to eventual champion Baylor. The Cougars will be playing close to home, playing in San Antonio. Now, would that mean anything? Well, it has been 50 years since a team playing at home in its home state had won the national championship. In 1975, UCLA claimed the last championship in the John Wooden era, beating Kentucky in San Diego. Now, will history repeat itself coming next weekend? We shall see. In the other national semifinal game will be a matchup of SEC teams, as Auburn, in its second ever appearance in the Final Four, will face Florida, making its sixth appearance and their first since 2014. The Gators won back-to-back titles in 2006 and 2007 under the direction of Coach Billy Donovan, who got his first taste of the Final Four when he was the point guard for Providence University in 1987 and his coach, some guy named Rick Pitino. Their back-to-back championships put the Gators basketball program on the map with players like Joakim Noah, Corey Brewer, and Al Horford. Now, after spending years at the bottom of the standings of the SEC for several years, the Gator program took flight in the early to mid-90s under Coach Lon Kruger and players such as Andrew DeClercq and Dimitri Hill. Led by DeClercq and Hill, the Gators made their first ever Final Four in 1994 in Charlotte. And the Gators gave the Duke Blue Devils a game in the national semifinal, but ended up losing to the Blue Devils 70-65. About a decade later, the Gators would get their time in the sun, so to speak, winning back-to-back national championships in 2006. The Gators would defeat UCLA 73-57 for their first title, while the next year, Florida did it again, proving it was not a fluke, this time beating Ohio State. Their opponent in the first game of the Twin Bill in San Antonio this upcoming Saturday is a team that they are very familiar with, the Auburn Tigers, and from a historical perspective, they are the least successful team of the Final Four. This is only their second ever appearance in the Final Four, with their first coming in 2019 and losing to eventual champion Virginia 63-62 in Minneapolis. In all, the Tigers have been in the tournament just 14 times in its history, with their first coming in 1983-84, led by a pair of future NBA stars. The first was a man they called the Rifleman, Chuck Person, who had a long and distinguished career in the NBA, most notably with the Indiana Pacers. The other, of course, is the man they once called the Round Mound of Rebound, none other than Leeds, Alabama's own Charles Barkley. It should once again be fun and interesting Final Four. Duke appears to be the hottest team heading into San Antonio, but will that dissipate when the teams head to Central Texas next weekend? And who would it be to have their one shining moment? This has been a Historically Speaking Sports special Final Four Bulletin.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
The Sports History Network presents Who Invented This Sport?, a sports origins podcast that explores the birth and evolution of sports as diverse as basketball and bobsledding. Discover the inventors, innovators, and pioneers who brought sports to the world. Go to your favorite podcast provider to find Who Invented This Sport, your Sports Origins podcast and part of the Sports History Network.